Alfie, thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. So you've got a bit of an interesting background, right? You were in finance, you went to crypto as like a dev, and then you started setting up companies from EDC to now creator type businesses and beyond. Um, can you just like give us a little bit of summary about like what you're currently doing? Because you've got the holding company, right? And then that owns a
Yes,
couple of different assets. Just like for the people that don't know who you are, just give us like the 60-second like summary.
sure. So I started my company in 2015. It's an e-commerce shop selling everyday carry gear. And then a couple of years later, we brought home a French bulldog, and my wife and I, very coincidental. Obviously, we weren't planning on it, but he went viral on Instagram and gained this huge following. So now I think he's got 126,000 followers on Instagram. And people were asking like, "Hey, where can I buy that leash? Where can I buy that harness?" And so we launched a dog shop. And because I already had my first e-commerce shop, it was very easy to kind of the back end operations is the same. The website obviously different, the audience very different, but everything else was very similar. And so we had these two companies going, and then the biggest pain point that we had was fulfillment and shipping. And we had a lot of other friends in the e-commerce world coming to us and saying, "Hey, fulfillment is also such a pain for us. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, what service are you guys using?" And we are like, you know what? Because we had such a problem with our 3PL, third party logistics company, we actually brought it in house, and so we do all the fulfillment in house. And so they were like, "Can you help us do that? Like, can you just like ship out our items too?" And so GrowthJet, which is our climate neutral certified 3PL, launched without a website and without a name. We just had paying clients from the get go. And so that is our third company. And what's funny is, Alfie, I didn't realize that there was such a thing as a personal holding company until I got on X. And when were talking about kind of like having these multiple companies and managing it with operators in place, I was like, wow, that's literally what I'm doing. And so I got wrapped into the whole PHC. I went down a rabbit hole of personal holding companies. And I realized, like, wow, I have 8 years of experience in PHCs, and people are starting their own PHC right now. And they're like trying to figure it out. And all of a sudden, I have 8 years worth of experience in this. And so, like, leveraging my experience and I guess just by default, I have like an authority, like I could speak about it. And so it's really interesting how like the PHC model and the philosophy just kind of like landed on my lap, and I'm like, wow, like I can talk about this very coherently. And so that's kind of how this all went down.
Could you explain the personal holding company to me? Because I have a couple of companies that are all set up as separate entities, right? And I have different people
Yeah,
involved in them, but I'm still running them day to day. It kind of sounds like you have general managers almost responsible for the majority of it, and then you're more of working on the business rather than in the business. But could I mean you're in San Fran, right?
yes, San
Yeah.
Francisco.
So I'm in London, so forget like the logistics of how it's set up and like the type of business. But can you just explain like what a personal holding company is and how you manage your
Absolutely.
operators and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So this is a great question. So aside from the entity structure, because I think that's more of that's not really, yes, it is important, but I really like the philosophy behind a personal holding company more than the actual legal structure entity, right? So personal holding company, literally, from my eyes, you are setting up a company that serves you as the person. And so what I mean by that is like a lot of holding companies in general in the past, holding companies have been around for decades, right? But 99.9% of them are about shareholder value and providing shareholder return on investment, ROI.
Yeah.
And so people invest into holding companies, and then they're looking for the operators of the holding companies to be able to go out there and find the best companies, the highest margins, and the efficient all these efficient companies that that I don't really care for. Like, for example, like a scaffolding company might be really profitable. Like, you go and like you got to paint the building, you put up the scaffolding, and like you get paid by the hour, and it's very profitable margin wise. But I have no interest in buying or acquiring a scaffolding company because I just don't care about them. And so I wouldn't do that. And so I think the difference between a regular holdco traditionally and a personal holding company is the personal holding company is each person's like own, like essentially like siloed projects that work together as a whole. And I think that's a key component too, because like one company might serve as kind of a cash flow cow for your other companies. And I'll give you an example. Like the French Bulldog company that we have is a really fun thing that my wife and I do. I mean, we go on all these trips together. Like, we get invited to these 5-star hotels. We're going up to Sonoma next month for collaboration with a 5-star hotel. So like these things are, it's more than just money. It's also about like turning hobbies into or turning your hobbies into businesses. And so like that concept, it's almost like a lifestyle business 2.0 in a way, where you've got these different companies set up for your own level of enjoyment, but also like cash flow. And
Yeah.
so holistically, when you look at all the companies in your personal holdco, they all work together as a whole to provide what you need. And each piece doesn't need to be about making money. Like it can be about having fun or whatever. But the whole point is that all of these things collectively work together to serve you as the person.
Okay, interesting. So just in terms of like the delegation side, do you, because I read, I'm not sure if this is true, but I read that you at some point, I'm not sure if that's now or in the past, but we're making like 300 grand from maybe all of these or one of them like a month, but by working on each of them very, very like Tim Ferriss style, like an hour a week or an hour every couple of
Yeah.
weeks or something like that. Is that right? Like, are you very much the business is there to serve you rather than the other way around?
That's correct. So I do have one business that is doing it did $3.3 million last year. And that's
Nice.
just one business, right? So I've got
Yeah.
three under this personal company. So this one business, 3.3 million last year, and I have a general manager who I've hired and trained over 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And so he is very much capable of running the business by himself. And so
Which one is it?
it's the pocket knife business.
Okay.
So
Okay.
everyday carry, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So EDC is like you said earlier, turning hobbies into businesses, and EDC is like, and you mentioned lifestyle. So EDC is like the great example, right? I love EDC. I'm like super minimalist in terms of what I carry, and I could speak to you for hours and hours about this sort of thing. I've gone through every wallet, well, maybe not every wallet, but I've gone through every single thing that you can think of, right? To try and find like the least stressful setup possible when I'm going day to day. Why like EDC and like because that's not the sort of thing that I personally would go, I'm going to start an EDC business, right? Well, how did you get into that?
Yeah. So I was looking at my expenses, and this is something that I urge all of your listeners to do is go through your credit card statements or bank statements and look at where you're spending your money. And like where you're spending your money, it's try to avoid things that are like groceries and things like that. That like it's not like like survival things. Like I get you got to spend money on food and stuff, but I'm talking about like hobby stuff, right? So if you do that, you'll realize that wow, I'm spending a lot of money on I don't know, clothing. Let's say like I'm really into clothing, like different styles and stuff. And then maybe you start content build like writing content on clothing, and then you can expense. I mean, this is tax stuff that maybe not applicable to the UK, but basically you can like there's so many tax advantages you can do. And also it's like you can just go and meet like these brands that you always admire. Like once you get to a certain size, like you'll be invited to their private events, you can meet the designers. I mean, it's like a really cool thing where like you're turning your hobby expenses into like your business. And so I think that is a really cool concept that not a lot of people think like, oh, I got to start a business. Like, oh, it's gonna be something that, I'm interested in, but it's not really gonna be like, I don't know. It's like they don't think outside the box of like what do you actually spend money on? And
Yeah.
can you turn that into a business? Right.
So were you spending a lot of money on wallets and like key rings and
Yes,
that sort of thing?
yes, yeah, yeah, exactly.
How
Yeah.
did you grow that? Was it like drop shipping, or did you make the products, or what was like the logistics of the business?
Yeah, so it started off as a retail shop. So I would partner up with other brands to bring them into the shop. And
Okay.
so I did that on purpose because the capital requirements are much lower. And
Yeah.
so I didn't need to do large runs of inventory. And so each week we do a gear drop. So every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, things could sell out really fast. It's the drop model.
Okay.
And then each week we iterate based on feedback and how things did the previous week. And then so we hold the inventory at the 3PL company that I have, GrowthJet, and then GrowthJet ships out the items for Urban EDC and Spotted by Humphrey. So yeah.
Are these like Shopify sites now then?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Such a cool business. I don't really sell any product apart from like some courses, but it's it's certainly something I'm passionate to get into at some point. Yeah. What about like the growth of that? Was that like paid ads and to get it
Yeah.
like because you can, if you get a really really good product, build out a great Shopify site and you put some good paid spend behind it with copy that converts, then you can have that thing just like fly off, to use your kind of your words, right? Is that how you did it?
So what's funny, Alfie, is that I was using Facebook ads to grow, and I remember, it was end of March. Actually, it was the last day of March. This is like 2016 or 2017. But my wife and I were celebrating because we had just cracked $100,000 a month, and it was the highest month that we've ever had. But then Facebook banned us like the next week because we were selling, quote unquote weapons that they would consider these pocket knives weapons. And so we lost like 40% of our revenue. And
Yeah.
it was a shock to us. And so, a lot of people say like double down on what's working. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? When you double down on what's working, you're also exposing yourself. You're essentially putting a lot of eggs in one basket. And when that basket goes away, then you're kind of screwed. And so um that's one thing to be mindful of, is like, of course you can be doubling down on stuff that's working, but be aware that if that's taken away, then you're more screwed than before. And so we grew. So after that happened, we started partnering up with other makers who had audiences. And so essentially the way we grew was through partnerships and collaborations from other people's audiences.
Yeah.
And so that was how we've grown over the last 8 years or so. Like each collaboration and partnership is a little bit bigger than the previous one. So we would always like leverage our previous partnerships to get someone who's a little bigger and more reputable, and then we kind of like climbed our way, and now we can work with pretty much anybody in the industry now. The doors have all opened up. So that takes a long time though.
Yeah.